Hey everybody, my name is Pete. Welcome to Woodworking for Nerds. So, today we're going to take Thor's hammer and we're going to scale it down into these handy woodworking mallets that you can use in your shop. Let's get going. We start off with a 3x3x12 chunk of cherry. Here I'm just using a hand plane to clean off two sides so that I can use those as reference faces when I pass them through the power planer later on. I suppose I could put this on a sled and just send it through the planer for all four sides, but I find it's too much fun to use a hand plane. With two sides cleaned up, we're just going to send it through the planer for the other two sides. Next, I'm going to use my miter saw to cut these big blocks to length. The final dimensions will be 2 7/8 by 2 7/8 by 5 inches. Now to shape the heads. First, we're going to put a chamfer on all four long edges of the table saw. Here, the fence is set at 2.5 inches from the blade. Now for the angled faces of the hammer. I have the blade set at 28 degrees this time, and the first cut I made didn't leave quite enough of a face for the engravings we're going to put on later on, so I just bumped over the fence. Then I just repeat that with the other 7 faces. To continue that chamfer on the long sides onto the faces, I'm going to use the disc sander. It's just the safest way I could find to do it. And this machine that you see me using is actually a shopsmith. In this video, I'm going to use it as a disc sander, a drum sander, a drill press, and a lathe. A pretty fantastic piece of equipment. Now, using a 1 1/4 inch Forstner bit, I'm going to make a hole for the handle to fit into. We'll revisit this hole later on. Now for the handle blanks. I take another 3x3x12 hunk of cherry, and I'm going to cut that up into 4 1.5 by 1.5 by 12 hunks of cherry. I'm going to set my table saw blade at just below half the thickness of the material. And you'll see here how I end up with 4 handle blanks with just a tiny strip of wood holding them together in the end. This allows me to keep my hands very far away from the table saw blade. We like safety here. Now I'm just going to split those off with a chisel. Now to the lathe. Off camera, I got the blank round, and here you can see I'm using a bowl gouge. Just whittle away at the tenon until it's exactly 1 1/4 inches thick. I'm going to check with calipers every stage of the way. After the tendon's round, I make a little mark with a pencil 3 inches from the top. That way I know not to touch it anymore during the turn. And after a quick sand, I move the tool rest and turn my attention towards the bottom of the handle. In addition to just getting the rest of the stock to thickness, we have to make a pommel that we're going to carve up later on. So give that a quick sand, round off the end. I'm going to give it some definition with a skew chisel, smooth out the rest while I'm at it. And then I'm going to get my calipers and my angle divider, set to 2 different thicknesses. This is going to mark out where the bands are going to be. The bands are about 1/4 inch in length, and it's about 3/4 of an inch in between each of the bands. After that, I'm going to go remove some of that waste with a parting tool. And since I noticed the parting tool left a little bit of a rough surface in between those bands, I'm going to clean them up quickly with a skew chisel. The result is a handle with a nice strong grip. The next thing the handle needs is a relief hole. This makes sure that when I drive a wedge through it later on, the handle's not just going to split right down the middle. Then I'm going to take my Ryoba and I'm going to create a kerf that wedge is going to fit into. Whenever I make rip cuts with the Ryoba, I first start with the finer cross-cut teeth. Then, after I get a good kerf going, I'm going to flip it over and use the rip teeth the rest of the way. Now to fit the joint. I'm going to tap in a wedge just to see how far the tendon's going to split. I'm checking to make sure it's more than 1.25 inches. Then I'm going to mark out on the head exactly how far this tendon has split, so I'll know to remove that material to provide room for the wedge to expand into when we join this up. And the best tool for this job is a drum sander. Alright, glue up time. Using a brush, I'm going to apply a very generous amount of glue to the tendon, just to make sure that any sort of minuscule gaps or what have you inside this are going to fill up. Then I'll apply some glue to the wedge. Put some glue into the kerf where the wedge is going to go. Fit the head on, and then look around for a mallet to tap in this wedge. Then realize, oh yeah, I'm holding one. After the glue dries, I saw off the excess part of the wedge off camera, and I made these little buttons that are going to go on the top. I'm going to attach them with wood glue and a little bit of CA glue, which is going to help it stick to the end grain that's on the top of that mallet. This isn't to cover up any mistakes or gaps in the joinery that I'm ashamed of. It's just to make it look a little bit more like Mjolnir. And I'm going to put it in a clamp just for a few minutes. Now for the fun part. We're going to carve up this pommel. I'm going to mark out 4 evenly spaced lines up there. Copy those lines on opposite faces. And the shape has these kind of U shapes that go all around. You'll see it when it all comes together. But to do that, I'm just going to draw an S connecting those 2 marks. And because I'm doing it this way, I can see that it's symmetrical on each side. Yeah, you know, that shape. Next, I'm going to use the point of a knife and just trace around that line. This is going to create a knife wall that's going to help us out carving later on. Now using that knife wall, I can just whittle right up to it and the waste flakes right off. I'm going to keep doing this over and over and over and over and over again until the negative space blends right in with the rest of the handle that we cut on the lathe earlier. Now I'm just using the sanding tip on a Dremel to clean up some of those edges. Now, using a pencil and a piece of scrap wood, I'm going to mark out the places where the rest of the engravings are going to go. These lines are going to be the only thing that I have to guide myself with when I go back at it with the Dremel and an engraving bit. So I'm making sure that they're nice and straight and they're easy to see. I'm using a piece of scrap wood instead of a ruler because the ruler was kind of big and clunky and kept sliding around on me. This way I just found was easier. With the design completely marked out, I'm going to go in with an engraving bit on my Dremel and just engrave, and engrave, and engrave, and engrave, and engrave. Takes a while, but it's worth it. After sanding up to 220 grit, it's time to apply the finish. And here I'm using a wiping polyurethane. I find that a harder finish is better with a softer wood like cherry. If I were using maple, I probably would have just given it a boiled linseed oil finish. Wow, I am really pleased with the way these turned out. So if you're sitting there thinking, man, I wish I had one of those, then you could either get one the hard way and follow all the instructions that you saw in this video, or you could do it the easy way and just hit that subscribe button below. I'm gonna be giving these away to 4 of the first 100 subscribers on my channel. So hopefully we'll see you for the next video. Thanks for watching.